It's time for the IRS to come clean. It's time to talk about what happened, how it happened, who came up with this plan and why, how widespread were these abuses, who is responsible, who's going to be held accountable, and how do we make sure this never happens again? Because more than $10 billion, that's B as in billion, in hard-earned taxpayers' money gets appropriated every year to the IRS to conduct its operations. And before Congress spends one more dime on the IRS, we need to know how it spends the money it receives already. We need to know what safeguards the IRS has in place or plans to put in place to make sure the funds are used in a legal and appropriate way and they're not wasted, poured down the drain like we've just learned. That's why we're holding this hearing today. I've heard some say that the IRS has been underfunded and that using names and political briefs to target these 501c4 applications for additional scrutiny was just a shortcut to deal with the growing number of tax-exempt applications. These shortcuts, however, started in 2010, when the number of 501c4 applications were basically static and the total number of applications for tax exemption were going down. And the funds appropriated to the IRS in 2010 were not only a record high amount, but it's also the second consecutive year that funds appropriated to the IRS actually exceeded the budget request of the IRS. And so doesn't it seem counterintuitive or seem strange that the IRS had less work to do and more money than ever to do that work, that they would decide to take these shortcuts? And in addition, sending abusive letters and asking for unnecessary information from these applicants doesn't sound like a shortcut to me. And so now we learn of the flagrant waste of taxpayers' dollars on conferences and videos, and the money came in part from the unused funds from the IRS enforcement budget. At the same time, the IRS was asking for more money for enforcement so they could catch the so-called tax cheats. Now, for 2014, the IRS budget request is for $12.9 billion. That's a $1 billion increase over the current year, and of which $440 million is to help implement the so-called Affordable Care Act, the so-called Obamacare. Now, even before the Inspector General's report was released, any kind of increase of this magnitude was going to be a challenge for some very basic reasons. Number one, there are a lot of objections to affordable health care, a lot of objections to Obamacare. The subcommittee has limited money. We all know that. We're looking at this breach of trust that we're talking about today in terms of this scandal. And now we have this newly discovered incredible waste. So we're going to have to think very carefully about the amount of money that we provide to the IRS. Now, nevertheless, I think we know this. We need to fund this agency so it can accurately answer questions from businesses and individuals about tax matters. It needs to produce tax forms and instructions that promote compliance. It's got to process tax returns in a timely manner, and it's also got to investigate the criminals that are committing tax fraud. However, we cannot in good conscience continue to provide hard-earned taxpayers' dollars to the IRS and have them use those funds to abuse the rights of American citizens. And we can't continue to provide the IRS with money and watch them so flagrantly waste those dollars. Now, today we're going to take testimony from Acting Commissioner Daniel Werfel and Treasury Inspector General J. Russell George. And I hope that we'll hear a little bit how we're going to get to the bottom of all this, how we're going to prevent this from happening again. But here's some things I can tell you already. We're going to insist that the IRS implement all 9 of the recommendations in the Inspector General's report to the satisfaction of the Inspector General. We're going to require more frequent and in-depth reports from the IRS about how they allocate their funds among their different offices. And we're also going to demand that the IRS demonstrate to the committee that the funds provided by this committee are used without a hint of partisanship or ideology when it comes to the application of the tax laws. Now, this hearing is Inspector General's second appearance before the subcommittee this year, and we appreciate your willingness to meet with us again. This is Mr. Werfel's first congressional hearing in his new role as acting IRS Commissioner. I want to congratulate you, if that's the right word, on your appointment, and thank you for taking this assignment in a very difficult time. We appreciate your service. And finally, let me say that this committee expects the witnesses to be candid and forthcoming. If additional information about the practice of targeting or other topics discussed here today comes to light after the hearing, we expect General George and Mr. Werfel to keep this committee apprised of the latest information. Now, I want everybody to have a chance to ask questions today, everybody to have a chance to have those questions answered, so I'm going to keep strict time in order to keep the hearing moving. And we want to get as many rounds of questions as we can. But right now, I'd like to recognize the ranking member, Mr. Serrano, for any opening statement he might like to make.
Thank you, Mr.